Welcome to you, Madame Florence Lustman, the president of the French Insurance Federation since October 1st, 2019. So I'd like to wish you, Madame, a great warm welcome. So are you here with us? I'm asking the technical team to make sure that you are indeed here with us. So I'd like to take this opportunity just to give a brief intro on your background. So Mrs. Lustman is a general inspector of finance. She has led the insurance supervision authority as a secretary general. She was also founding member of the CIOPS, which became the IOPA. You are a member of the executive committee of the International Association of Insurance Supervisors and a member of the Standard Advisory Council of the International Accounting Standard Board. So we are greatly honored to have you here with us. So we are all ears, and we are looking forward to what you'll have to share with us. And I'll try to ask a few questions at the end of your presentation, or I'll share the questions that were shared by our audience. So thank you very much for this invitation to the Casablanca Insurance meeting. Year after year, these meetings are really a major highlight of the insurance in the world, and so that we've been able to see that with the great panelists that have taken the floor over the course of this day. We all obviously regret not being able to be physically in Casablanca, and we look forward to being there in person next year. But at least thanks to technical innovation, we managed to be connected together here today, despite being in the around the world. And as you very well mentioned, in France, we enjoy very close relations with the Moroccan Federation, and for a very long time. So it's a great honor for me and a great pleasure to be able to take part in this event. So the 2021 edition is dedicated to the pandemic, so a topical theme. But in a way, it's also a theme that concerns the future, because this pandemic will have major repercussions on the world and on the planet and on our insurance business in particular. So even from afar, I paid close attention to all of the discussions, and what I've noticed is that there's a great convergence amongst the insurers of the world. We have shared the same observations, and we all share the same challenges. And one of the panelists, in fact, was saying that this crisis has revealed the high expectations that were expressed vis-à-vis our sector. And this crisis also showed the limits of the insurance business. And it also recalled the importance of insurance for the resilience of our societies. And so we must admit that this crisis is unprecedented, that took us by surprise, including us in the insurance business. And so even if pandemics was a part of our risk mappings, and so for us, the pandemic maybe implied more illnesses and more deaths. So the insurance segments that should have been impacted by a pandemic was health or insurance or death insurance. And obviously this was not the case, and nobody in the world had made the connection between a pandemic and the interruption in an administrative interruption of our economies. And this was absolutely not anticipated. So it's a great lesson of humility for everyone. This crisis particularly impacted Europe, France, and in the rest of the world. It impacted it from a risk standpoint for the insured risks, and especially the business interruption that has caused in all of the businesses that were interrupted. And in France, there was a major impact on financial markets, and a year ago, and so it was in fact our first lockdown, which was very difficult. And in fact, even insurance intermediaries had interrupted their operations. So, and mid-March, we had a strong major decline in financial markets, but also a decline in the bond markets. And as you might imagine, this had a very negative impact. So we entered into this first lockdown with this shock on the markets, on the rates. So our key priority as insurers, as French insurers, and I believe for the community, insurance communities at large, is was our the major priority were our insured. So what was the biggest priority for our insured was obviously to be able to continue insuring them. We are an essential service, and claims and water damage, fires obviously did not stop with the lockdown. So what we did in France, what was done in pretty much around the world, well, we put 150,000 employees on a remote working mode, and this is a great source of pride to have managed to provide the services. And back then, we managed about 20,000 claims per day during the first lockdown, which was quite substantial. And through the commitment of our teams, who ended up having to work from home almost instantly. The second priority for our insured was to ensure that we insurers would remain solvent. So in the very short term, we needed to manage the claim. That's the very least we could do, but we could also needed to ensure see what the impact of this crisis would have on our balance sheet. Because obviously our main concern is our solvency. Their insured need to be sure that we would be by their side in a year, in 5 years, or in 30 years. And it's true that we as French insurers, and I'm sure that this same applies to my colleagues throughout the rest of the world, well, this took us a couple of weeks to figure out, to 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 quantify the real impact of this crisis. We also instantly decided on putting in place a whole set of solidarity measures in addition to our contracts and policies. And throughout the entire crisis, French insurers showed a great deal of generosity and solidarity for their insured, excuse me, and also for citizens, not only insured. We which amounted to about 1 billion euros, from reducing premiums to free months of rent, financial aid, donations of masks, of funding research, and we also continued to support youth. And we figured that this crisis was also an opportunity for us to draw into insurance very interesting profiles. And for example, in 2020, we increased by 50% the number of youth in, in part in the policyholders of our insurance companies. And so we were able to put in place measures regarding gender equality, diversity, and we wanted to send a strong signal that the business was going on, and even though it was not necessarily business as usual, but that business was going on nonetheless. So this crisis that took place this year did have a multiple and significant impacts on insurers, with a major there was a major issue in France with business interruption. And just to I'd like to give a shout out to our American friends, because we very much appreciated the the position that was taken by the NIAC, which was at least the very much faster than what our financial authority said, that we could not ask insurers to simply provide coverage aside from the covers that were in the insurance contracts. But in France, for example, the restaurant, the hospitality industry, the hotel industry would have hoped to be indemnified for business interruption that were not provided for in the contracts. And unfortunately, the confirmation of the fact that these covers were not included in the contracts, or at least for 93% of the cases was not included. Well, this confirmation arrived from our regulatory authority in June. And the one thing that I do regret is that we left all of these professionals sort of remain hopeful that they would be able to obtain this systematic indemnification from the insurers. Obviously, is simply impossible. I mean, the amount of the business, I mean, the business interruption for these impacted companies probably amounted to 880 billion euro, excuse me. And so this was absolutely not possible nor realistic. But there was this major expectation that was expressed vis-a-vis the insurance industry. What I do regret about the crisis that we could not nip it at the bud and nip this expectation at the bud, because obviously these restaurateurs, these the industry were in very much economic distress, and we tried to support them because they are our insured, and so our intermediaries were reporting all of their difficulties and challenges to us. But we were in a dead end, and obviously we could not provide cover that was not included in our contracts and policies. So regarding our policies and contracts, we had a major impact in terms of claims. We've had almost 3 billion euros in claims. More 3 billion euros in claims were directly connected to COVID. And so these were claims that mainly concerned companies. And so obviously for business interruption, there were 3% of the contracts that covered them. And there were 4% of contracts where insurance companies made some commercial gestures. And so there were others where that still benefited from some sort of indemnification, even if there wasn't any coverage that was provided for in the initial contract. We also have health insurance and social welfare insurance that were strongly impacted, and so social welfare, corporate social welfare that indemnified unemployment, and so which increased by 20%. 20%. So there were a lot of people to indemnify. So just to echo what one of the panelists just said, I mean, we in fact had less auto claims because during the first lockdown we were not very much allowed to travel or move, so cars weren't really being used except those for healthcare providers. So there was a positive impact on auto claims, or the frequency of auto claims. But overall, we could see that, I mean, this overall, I mean, it represented about a surplus of excess 3 billion euros that were caused by COVID, in addition to the different solidarity initiatives, and so which amounted to in total to 3 billion plus 1.7 billion in the solidarity gesture. So there, as far as life insurance, which experienced a major lower collections and a sort of net decollection. So we dispersed more benefits than we received, and with 6.5 billion in disbursements, and with a very big differentiation. We had a very strong discollection in euros, so for guaranteed capital, and on the other hand, a net collection that was highly positive on unit accounts. And so for the French market, this was some excellent news. This means that the transformation of this life insurance model on the French way was starting to take place. What's also a great news for our intermediary insurance friends is that this year 2020 also showed to which extent they were necessary to the proper functioning of our industry. So why did we collect much less? I mean, why did we have much less collections? Well, simply because our intermediaries were closed during the first lockdown, and so there were a entire quarter during which there was a an interruption of business interruption. So there was a lot less interaction, and so this just goes to show that life insurance is a product which requires a lot of advisory to be properly sold. I mean, there's um, a lot of it needs a push. There's needs a real push to be sold, to properly understand the needs of the client, to understand their risk appetite, to be able to propose the best possible contract which meets the client's demands. So once again, if we want to see the glass half full, this is a sort of tribute paid to the quality of our sales networks. So, what lessons can we draw today from this crisis, even if unfortunately it is very far from being over? The first lesson I would say is this issue that was caused that this issue with business interruption, that shows the major expectations that our citizens had with respect to insurance. Also, the necessity for us to better explain our business, and especially pooling, to understand that when a risk is systemic, so where it impacts everyone at the same time, well, private insurance alone cannot cover all of these risks. And this might be an obvious for us as insurers, but this is obvious information that needs to be explained to the public. And so obviously not during a time of crisis, but in the long term, this is part of the messages that we need to convey and that we need to explain. Just like the fact that we cannot reimburse premiums of those that don't have claims, simply because the premiums serve to indemnify their neighbors who did have a claim. So there are a few fundamentals that in France are not established and that need to be established. So the second lesson is that we showed a great deal of responsiveness. I will give you two examples, and then here again I will uh, reference what some of the points that were raised by the panelists. So it's true that we as insurers, well, this was not covered in the contract, or at least it was not covered in the majority of cases. This was not a comfortable situation a year ago. So at the same time that we were trying to put in place these aid mechanisms, well, in parallel, we were launching a major collaborative project to try to design a solution that would allow us to face a future crisis. Just like the American insurers, we were already projecting ourselves into the next crisis or disaster to try to imagine a solution that would be successful the next time around. And so this solution obviously couldn't simply be based on the private insurance sector. I mean, this was obviously impossible. So what we designed or imagined was a public-private partnership
to the image of what exists in France in with respect to natural catastrophes, and which makes it possible to, in the case of natural catastrophes, to pay compensation. We've put on the table of the Minister of Finance, or Prime Minister, a proposal for a PPP with a compulsory insurance that pools, well, the risk on all of the French companies, and that would make it possible in a lump manner to provide a very quick contribution in the case of the occurrence of a crisis, just like the one that we've had in the pandemics. In any case, a crisis that would trigger the administrative lockdown of companies, because this is what we are willing to cover, the economic consequences of the administrative lockdown of whole walks of the economy.
Il est robuste. Process has the merit to exist. It is really a prudential process. For political reasons, it hasn't been actually retained or agreed upon by the French ruling parties and political parties and authorities. We're going to be working on it, but I don't think any what other kind of response could be provided, at least in the insurance world. What we did in parallel, as you know, our business is to really be forward looking. We always live in the future. We do insurance. So this is our core business. So we look ahead and think ahead. So the same way where we actually think about a coverage system for the COVID, for the crisis, post crisis. So we were actually stepping in the post-crisis period, and we were thinking that our economy would dramatically need us for recovery. In other words, need the investment of the insurance companies. So as early as 30 May, we kicked off a very large investment program. So we were just coming out of the confinement. So we put like 2 billion euros on the table to fund the French and European companies with a focus on health, on tourism. And at this point, we have already started to fund very good and very flourishing enterprises from these sectors. So promising enterprises that are, of course, challenged by the current crisis, but do have great capacities to revive and reboot. So we do have that role to protect, but also to fund and finance the economy by investing the premiums of our insured. So by way of conclusion, I would say, yes, this crisis has been very hard. Yes, it was hard for us as insurance companies, but let's look at things positively, on a more positive note. This is what I want to do with you this evening? Well, simply because we have clearly shown our utility and how useful we could be. And we have shown our reactivity and capacity to look ahead and look and dive in the future. What really is a change from other policymakers and enterprises. And this crisis showed us how to be innovative. The fact of steering our companies for almost a year, almost entirely remotely, led us to scale up the digitalization process. And this is actually something that we have won so far for the future. This is a benefit. And we have imagined innovating financing solutions like PPPs to cover natural disasters or future disasters in the future. We hope that won't be that many, but let's be forward looking. And we have committed to engage in a very, very strong commitment on a very inclusive insurance. And the program of 2 billion euros called the Sustainable Recovery Program, it actually conditions the financing to the fact that enterprises that should benefit and enjoy from those funds, they need to have the social responsibility kind of mindset, the strategy. In other words, women, gender approach, youth, aging population. In other words, they really have to be environmentally and socially responsible. This is something that the insurance companies are very keen on. Now, another message that I want to launch to public powers and authorities. What we did is launch that message to the public powers, urging them that for us to be able to do our business and our job as supporters of the economy, that they will allow us or should allow us to invest in the economy of the future and economy of tomorrow. And this is why the European standards of solvency are not always in line, or our policies rather are not always aligned with the EU standards, which led to the greening of our industry and our economy. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, dear Ma'am, Mrs. Florence Lustman. I just recalled that you're president of the French insurance company. Thank you for what you said, or you hardly said, and you said a lot, by the way. And I have tens of questions. I would have tens of questions to ask you, but unfortunately, we have little time left. But we're very happy to have you with us. But you reminded very well the responsibilities of the insurance companies, their risk and their roles, etc. So I hope that next time you will be consulted before an administrative decision that plans for the closing down of a whole economy. And I hope you will be talked to and consulted before these significant decisions are made. and you are definitely one of the insurance counselors and advisors. Thank you very much for having been with us, and thank you very much for having attended this very insightful and rich webinar. So I urge the participants to look at the bios of our keynote speakers and great panelists. And I would like to thank the scientific committee for the very incredible choice of our keynote speakers and panelists. And we'll meet tomorrow to talk about the insurance world in this world in motion. Thank you very, very much for your kind attention, and wish you a very nice evening. Thank you.